Usually at the beginning of each semester, because we have a meditation component and then the actual text that we're going through. You usually give some instruction on meditation, but I'm assuming since most of you have been here before, you're already pretty familiar with the meditation practice. But then I see some new faces every week, so I'm not sure. But rather than going over it again, I would suggest that a copy was made on some kind of film, right, of the class where we went through 3 sections of meditation, the first one having to do with the physical posture, and the second part doing with the breathing, kind of breathing to use in meditation practice, and the third one, the most important really, is mental discipline, how you discipline or train the mind in meditation. And then I did that 3 or 4 times over the years, and finally someone put it down. So as my brain forgets everything, it'll be there on YouTube or whatever. What is it on?
It's on the playlist.
The playlist. I don't know what that is. It's on a playlist. Okay. I have it on a device called an iPod, and I don't know what to do with it. Anyhow, I don't have the meditation, I have the playlist, but I never know what it means, so I just pass it by. But if you wanted to look at that, and what I would say about that, it is not something that I myself came up with or created, but rather the teachings I got in meditation from my teachers and they got from their teachers. So it's a very standard, grounded, traditional explanation of sitting meditation practice that if you wanted to, you could refer to that, and then we won't go over it in class every time. Okay? And then if you don't know what a playlist is, I don't, ask Locke. He's behind. Locke, could you just, everybody thinks it's a disembodied voice. Stand up and then show yourself. That's Locke. Okay, it's a real person. He's not a playlist.
Archive of his lectures since episode 1, pretty much. So if you go check out our playlist on YouTube, we'll have info to meditation videos.
My niece will be impressed. I'm cool.
What's the name of the playlist to search?
So you want to go to Dharma Realm Live, the YouTube channel, and then you'll look for Friday Night Meditation with Dr. Verhoeven, and you'll see about 95 episodes or so. And in one of those 95, there will be an introduction to meditation.
Did you search?
And I think we did put it up in the DRU extension website.
So there's 2 places. DRBUX. Okay.
That's easier.
You don't have to be X generation to go there, though, right? Okay. So the reason I'm saying this is because it is a meditation class. But more importantly, this is one thing that if you get it down right, especially if you're young, that doesn't mean you can't do it as you get older, but it gets more difficult to incorporate this into your mind and body and emotions as you get older, particularly the body. But if you pick this up while you're young and you continue this 15, 20 minutes an hour every day, you will find over time it's probably one of the best investments you ever made in terms of a lifelong practice. Not only will it be very conducive to good health and longer life, if you prefer to have a longer life, but it also really helps clarify and settle emotions. And as you do this, your priorities naturally become more clear and, I'd say, grounded and centered. And what isn't important also becomes clear and set. And it's not like something's magical happens. Just by stilling the mind and body and listening to yourself a little bit every day, you tune into what's called a good and wise advisor within. And it's an intuitive understanding you have of how to make choices and decisions that's really quite natural. It's not religious per se at all. It's just a natural attunement. And this meditation technique just helps you in a daily way tune into that space, to that awareness within and without. So it's really just a wonderful thing to do. You may forget the lectures here, and that's fine, but if you have a daily practice. The other thing I say about that is the text itself will start to make sense to you in different ways if you continue to do the meditation practice. As you still the mind and settle out distractions, passages of the text, words in the text, imagery in the text will come to your fourth consciousness, will come to actually be almost a relational experience you have with the text. It'll come alive, in other words, because it's spoken from that space, that deep intuitive space. And by accessing yourself, you're actually creating a bridge to the voice of the author, in this case, the Sixth Patriarch. So it has many functions, the meditation practice. Probably the most important in terms of the passage tonight, it allows us to tune into a reality beneath the reality we take as real. Sorry to do that to you. And the text will be clear about this, that most people, they say living beings, kind of flow and turn in a river or a stream of seeming reality. And yet, there's a sense that we have that it isn't that way really at all. There's moments when we see through it, we get glimmers that what we're taking to be real is actually a dream, an illusion, a bubble, a shadow, like a movie of some sort. And yet, there's moments when we can wake up a little bit from it, we can see through it as if the fog clears, and then it settles in again and takes hold. And what the meditation practice does, it gives you a ground of observation to observe yourself, observe the world, and observe, more importantly, the interaction between your consciousness and the world as they form and go about this creative experience of reality. And so the meditation is a vantage point from which you can quiet yourself, and they use the word stop and contemplate, stop and observe the nature of things. So there's many advantages to this, but let's go to the passage tonight. We're finishing up on this lively encounter on page 70, let's see where it begins. It actually begins on 75, I believe. We're on page 79 now. Without repeating where we've gone so far, I just want to cover one passage here on 79 and then move on to the verse, which is very succinct and rich. So I'm looking at first paragraph here. He scolds this disciple for having a misconception about the nature of spiritual practice, of cultivation, and the goals. And he's basically seen the goal of this spiritual cultivation through two lenses. One is, what do I get? I want it. Give it to me. I hunger for this. I want the bliss of nirvana. I want the altered states of consciousness and so on to prove that I've got something. Or he falls into the other. There's nothing whatsoever to get. It's all a sham. It's all false. It's hopeless. And then one falls into a nihilistic despair. So he's moving between the horns of this particular two views. So the master scolds him, in a sense, and then regrounds him, and then gives a second paragraph here. And I would just read it from, you should know that the Buddha taught, because deluded people mistook the combination of the five skandhas for their own essence and being, and discriminated so as to make all things external to themselves. They loved life and dreaded death, drifted and flowed along from thought to thought, unaware that this was all an unreal dream, hollow and false. They pointlessly turned round and round on the wheel of birth and death, wrongly imagining that the eternal bliss of nirvana was some kind of suffering, and all day frantically sought after something else. And then the Buddha, it says, out of pity, out of empathy, seeing this, and probably this was the first spur upon his awakening to then not just pull away into a state of nirvana that he was enjoying, but to actually re-enter into the conditioned reality and teach and transform for 49 years. And you see this pattern occurring again and again across traditions when teachers, men and women, have profound awakening experiences, and immediately, for some reason, not only do they see things really clearly for themselves, in themselves, and through themselves, but they also have this stirring of kindness and compassion for other living beings. In other words, they almost feel as if I could and am enjoying this, and this is so wonderful, I don't want to not share this. I cannot enjoy this. Actually, the Bodhisattva, there's a passage in Avatamsaka says, I can't thoroughly enjoy this while I know that others are not. And it's like, and it's not just a compassion or kindness directed towards someone else, but it's said it's a single substance compassion where you feel one and the same with everyone else. So it's not other directed, but rather other inclusive, so that self and other completely merge at this point, and there isn't this sense of I'm doing this for them. Hence, there's no compassion fatigue, because it's just part of how you live now from there on. And all living beings you take as your basic substance. So it's a very, very different orientation that comes. But in any event, what he's saying here is out of pity, the Buddhas then teach and transform and carry on. So this passage of all living beings mistakenly deluded take the 5 skandhas, and we went through that. I'm not going to go through that again this week. You can look at the playlist earlier to see the 5 skandhas. So I'm not going to use this all the time now. Check the playlist. Okay, to see what the 5 skandhas are. But basically, it's the Buddhist delineation of the mind-body continuum. So the body is the first skandha, and there's 4 aspects of mind that consist of the other 4 skandhas put together. This mind-body psychophysical entity we call the self is actually an aggregate, says the Buddha. It's an aggregate, like a chariot has different parts that make it a chariot, but only when it's combined do we call it a chariot. There's nothing to any of these things in themselves, except when combined they temporarily make this thing. So when these 5 skandhas are held together in a pulsating aggregation, it's almost like Brownian motion. It's not static still, but it's movement within a certain form. The way you can think about this, in my limited scientific purchase, sometimes I think of you take something like water and you change the external conditions, drop the temperature, water then coalesces into a crystal form and basically becomes hard ice, right? It's still water, but it's in a different form. The causes and conditions cause it to aggregate into hard ice. If you increase the temperature, it melts back into water. If you increase the temperature more, it boils. Then it steams, then it evaporates. So it goes from form to emptiness across a continuum in the same way our bodies are. So the form, the physical form of the 4 elements and our consciousness are like matter and energy. They're held together by certain causes. We in this room are held together by certain causes and conditions. We might think, yeah, solid, real. But if we up the temperature through atomic, whatever, we would just vaporize. And if we get really, really cold, all of a sudden we go into a hypo state, right? Where the pulse and everything would go down and down, and eventually then life would cease. So you can see this as when someone dies, and it's one of the meditations monks used in the forest tradition, they would observe this form when the breath had left, and observe that it falls apart and decays and goes back into the elements again. So these contemplations are meditation techniques to get us to see that what we take as me and mine is an aggregate that's held together by certain causes and conditions. And even our thoughts and feelings and emotions are conditioned. They're conditioned by the psychophysical limitations of what we call our body and mind. We can only see, feel, and experience a certain realm of reality. That doesn't mean we experience all of reality. We only experience what our sense organs give us access to. There's certain things we don't see that are right around us. Gosh, I was looking at this thing from the Hubble. Man, that's amazing. So the Hubble's going out there. Everybody know what the Hubble is? Oh, okay. Well, there's my chance to okay, the Hubble is this great mirror telescope float, yep. And so they go through a segment, and the Hubble focuses, there's nothing there. It's completely dark. And you think, there's true empty space. And it stays there. And within about 4 or 5 days of continuous focus, all of a sudden the light starts to reach it, and it starts revealing that emptiness. And this was a point off the Big Dipper, off the point of the Big Dipper. You start to see these galaxies. And they do lenses, so they get ultraviolet and whatever, you know. And you're going, my God, in that space there is more color and light than the whole of the Louvre Art Museum. And it's vibrating and pulsating right there, and it's like absolutely stunning to see, you know, what's going on in that space. And then they were saying, by the way, the amount of stars that they're being able to detect, not that are, just detect through that. This is mind-blowing to me. This was an astrophysicist saying, the number of stars that we can detect from this Hubble are more than all the sand grains on the Earth. So, no, they did not count the sand grains. Obviously, they're taking huge deposits of sand, they're doing a measurement, calculating from that, and saying, right now, the stars that we know exist are greater than all the sand grains. Not in the Ganges River, which is a classic line from the text, but all over the entire Earth and all the deserts and whatnot. Now, why did I digress to that? There was some reason that got me going. I forget.
Reality.
Reality. And what was I saying about reality?
Different realities that we can't see.
Oh, right, thank you. So our sense organs have limits. Oh, I'm going to put you on my playlist. Our sense organs have limits. We can't see that. With the Hubble, we can only see it for a momentary time. They're building a bigger one that's going to go on and blow our minds even further. And people keep talking about, oh, we're right there. We're almost at the edge of the universe. But where is that edge? It keeps expanding. And I keep thinking, well, if there's an edge, what's beyond the edge? Nothing? Well, that's what they thought that was. That was nothing until they really focused on it. So the same way with our ears. We know we have ultra and subsonic that we don't pick up on. Our nose, my dog in Maine is 50 times sharper in the nose than I am on a good day. And on a bad day, it's probably 100 times sharper. And so on and so forth. We know that our senses have limits, yet we convince ourselves that our purchase on reality is as it really is. We really think that we see things as they really are. And so this is a humbling thing. And what the text is saying here is that we take these 5 skandhas as our own essence and being, and then we externalize and say everything is outside of that, rather than we see it as a mutual interactive creation. What I call something is an interpretive exercise of consciousness. Yes, some image comes in through the eye or the nose, but my interpretation of that, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, want, don't want, and so on and so forth, like, don't like, all of this is an exercise in consciousness. That's why there's 4 of the consciousnesses activating, and just 1 with the body, because consciousness is actually much more important in this scheme of Buddhist psychology. And it says, but unaware of all this, that it's a dream, an illusion, a bubble shadow, that this is a dog and pony show that we're creating through the interplay of consciousness and sense objects in our sense organs, and it's constantly shifting. And we can see this as we get older. You can see what you call reality if you think about it, how you felt and experienced it at 3 or 4 or 5, at 10 or 12 or 13, in your 20s and 30s, in your 50s and 60s, and towards the end as things start to go. The reality is pretty much the same. You know, it's kind of a constant. But your interpretation of it has shifted dramatically. And we call this growth, but it may just be moving in a circle. In any event, consciousness becomes very important. So he goes on to then talk about nirvana. And I won't go into this as much because we'll get to it again on the next page, which is page 80. And nirvana was a term that was used to inadequately try to point at a state of liberated, unattached, unbound being that is true self and is considered to be extremely blissful and deeply unchanging and pure, meaning nothing added, no admixture whatsoever. These are called the four virtues of nirvana. At the same time, I say it's an inadequate term because the Buddha himself did not want to put it into a term. Because as soon as it was reified into a term, we then made it into something that we could get, something that we could grasp our skandhas around it. And so what the Buddha is saying, the five skandhas in their confused state when they're functioning can't get it. All they get is further confusion seen through the myopic lens of a self. And it's only when that lens is gone that nirvana is experienced. And then the direct experience of that, because it surpasses these lenses, we can't put it into language because language emerges from the lenses themselves. Language is a tool of the lenses. And so it's a limited tool of expression. It's not completely wrong. I mean, here we have language, right? But the text always says it's like fingers pointing to a moon. It's like using the false to find the true. Don't mistake it for the true, but use it as an indicator of something. So it points us in a direction. Often what happens in religious experience, people then gravitate to the word and say, the word is it. I have the word is this and that. Rather than saying the word is like a raft that gets you someplace, and once you're at that place, then you don't need the word anymore. There's that great passage from the Zhuangs that I won't quote again, but it ends with, where can I have a conversation without words with somebody who understands my meaning? Okay, so anyhow, this is the limitation. So while the Buddha, let me quote you, very clear, the Buddha said, it's not nothing whatsoever. Don't mistake nirvana as the extinction of all existence. It's not the ceasing of existence. It's rather something closer to existence ceases to be a problem, or existence ceases to be dukkha in the Buddhist term. It ceases to be an unsatisfactory experience, but it doesn't cease. So let me quote you. Nor is it a paradise that you go to and dwell happily in ever after. Because ever after would then, and dwelling ever after, would then indicate a me that dwells, and you'd be back in that dualistic frame that is the preset to this liberation, if you understand. So, quote you from, this is from the Udana. There is a sphere, and it's described as a sphere, as a state, a realm that's neither earth, nor fire, nor water, nor air. It's not infinity of space, and it's not the infinity of consciousness, and it's not nothingness, and it's not either perception or non-perception, which is neither this world nor an other world, and it's not sun or moon. He just goes through all the things you think it might be. I deny that it is even coming or going. It's not enduring, and it's not death or birth. It is only the end of suffering. So it's interesting, the Buddha defines it as not this. It's only the end of suffering. For suffering to end, though, we have to look at the text more carefully. How does suffering end? Pills. Pills will end your suffering, right? You get the right pill and it's all over, all your suffering. I've been listening to stuff on the opioid addiction rate, which is very interesting. In the richest, most advanced country in the world, we have one of the hugest proportions of opioid addiction. Unbelievable. And I encountered up in Maine. We think, nice Maine, it's very tranquil. No. They had to close the pharmacy in the local town because people were selling it out of the back. So they closed the pharmacy. Now you have to drive 50 miles to get an aspirin. So how is suffering ended? No, I was joking. It's not the pill. But there is a pill I saw after class. That does good. No. Look at the equation. There is this truth of suffering. There is a cause of this. There is an end of it, and there is a remedy to do it. So for suffering to end, what has to happen in this formula of the four truths? Come on.
Lose your attachments.
Well, the second cause has to be removed. The cause of suffering has to be removed. And the cause of suffering removed, the effect of suffering is gone. The cause of suffering is the second truth, which is? Ignorance and desire in combination. So this, I mean, you could say this is kind of religious, philosophical, but it's actually really psychological. What's being said here is the reason for the dissatisfaction is not because life is suffering, but an unenlightened, unawakened life is suffering. This is very different than saying life is suffering. You know, the Buddhists are all like, dukkha, it's all suffering. No, if it's that way, then you would very easily slip into a kind of nihilistic abandon. Just say, the hell with it, I'm out of here. But the Buddha's not saying life is suffering. He's saying life as we encounter it through the myopic filters of self and ignorance and craving becomes a source of suffering. The awakened life is not. It's called nirvana. Oh, that's very different. So you have to get to the heart of this. It's not a given that existence is suffering. It is an experience through an interpretation we have. And that interpretation is coming through the heart of this second noble truth, which is a misunderstanding that then is conflated with Trishna. Trishna, which is thirst, literally thirst. And it doesn't mean just desire, because you can say, I desire to end suffering. Oh, no. Thirst is an inordinate, unsatisfied, irrational hunger, thirsting, longing that can never be satisfied. It's an overreaction. So this becomes really important if we're trying to understand how the Buddha says, I say it's the end of suffering. In other words, when the ignorance and the craving, the thirsting, cease, when they cease, that is nirvana. That's not the end of life. It's actually, they call wondrous existence. Wondrous existence. It means life now really begins to open. From wonder to wonder, existence opens in this formula. But it's a different life than the life that was conceived of and lived through grasping, attaching, fear, anxiety, and so forth. So you can see this is really very psychological. And where the Buddha goes here, he says, when through the image of the self, which is this autonomous, self-contained myth that we think we are. And it's really funny. I say this, I suffer from this every day. I still, in my unconscious moving around, still think of this as going on forever. Even if I look at my catalog of pictures and I notice that I'm not the same as when I was 4. And yet, in my mind's eye, it's like, oh, that's the same guy, you know. No, it's not. I'm constantly changing. And I just saw a friend pass away, and as that friend passed away, I had to say to myself, as he is, I will be. Even though I don't feel that. I feel good, okay? I'm okay. And I don't feel, but the reality is that that is coming. And the Buddha was very savvy on the psychological level. He says, we play all sorts of games about this, but the reality is just inexorable. You cannot avoid it. We try to. The whole of human existence, the Buddha said, is one futile attempt to avoid this one great matter. And yet, in the end, it's like gambling in Reno. The house wins. The odds are, no matter how you play that wheel, the odds are against you. Because it isn't the nature of things that everything conjoined eventually comes apart. There's nothing that resists that. Okay, so that being the case, the Buddha said 3 types of thirst arise around this. And the reason I'm bringing this up, this is another way to look at wrong views or dristi. Last week we talked about wrong views as 4 categories of how I view myself into relation to the outside world through 3 dimensions of past, present, and future, and so forth. Through the 5 skandhas, we end up with 62. These are called dristi gata, the actual 62 views, which I don't have time. I mean, if we had time, this would be a wonderful, but it'd take about 5 classes to go through them all. And then you could actually do an inventory, say, no, I got that one. Yep, no, I don't have that. Oh, that one, that's big for me. That's my view. And they're called views, but another word for them is sometimes called wrong convictions. So it's your deeply held belief, but it's off. Now, the way you tell this is what I believe in is on and right, and what you believe in is off. No, I'm just playing. Okay? But we don't see them necessarily. We don't see them as wrong. We feel they're absolutely, for sure, solid and true. And so the Buddha said, these arise between, I went through that list last week. This week I'm going to suggest another way to see them. They arise through setting up around these three different kinds of thirst. Okay, so the Buddha said, when we encounter this existential reality and we know this is happening, and we know this too comes to us and we pass, we get into anxiety. Anxiety then leads to desire. It's not desire first. Anxiety, the uncertainty leads to desire. And then he says there's three kinds. And someone's going to have to get me with a third tonight. So who's got their little phone? Can look up. The first one is kama. The second one's bhava. And I think the third one is abhava? Abhava. Thank you. You didn't have to look it up. That's good. Okay. So what he's saying, psychologically what happens, and take it out of Buddhism now, just say the human response to this stress and anxiety of knowing I too will pass, the first one is kama, which is really a kind of sinking into gross materialism. Just thinking everything I can touch, feel, taste, grab onto is all there is. So it's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I may die. And that's the psychology of this. And so you want to grab all the gusto you can while you still have life in you. And so it becomes a frantic, driven to have the full experience of the senses, a kind of hedonism 24/7 until the body can't sustain it anymore. How did Edna St. Vincent Millay put it? My candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night. But oh my friends and oh my foe, what a brilliant light. And it's gone. It's like the 4th of July. Okay, so you go up and smoke. But you think, that's the first response. That's the first thirst. And it's a thirst for this. The second one, bhava, is a thirst, a kind of materialism, but it's a more disciplined materialism. This is a search for long life and immortality. And so you start to invest not in eat, drink, and be merry, but you carefully eat, carefully drink, and carefully be merry with the idea and carefully sign up for this club and that club and different kinds of health treatments and spas. And if you're Chinese, you go for elixirs of immortality, which killed a number of emperors, by the way, because it was, what were they using? What's cinnabar? Cinnabar was a form of mercury. Yeah, so try that. Just go home and break open a thermometer and swallow and see if you get immortality. But different ways of cooking these ingredients. You see this in the conquistadors, thinking that Florida, right? Florida was the fountain of youth. They can't, why are you laughing? Florida at that time was perceived that you go there and there was a fountain that you could go into and you would live forever. You'd get youthful Peter Pan immortality. That was in Florida. Then they thought it was in New Mexico, so they skirted over there. Then it was in South America. So this quest for immortality goes on and on. You can see in the ancient Egyptians with the embalming process and whatnot. I think Mao is a form of physical immortality in that he's marinated. I don't say marinated, what are they? Embalmed with special fluids in a crypt, right? Anyhow, this psychological urge takes many forms, and the latest, of course, is cryogenics. I've talked about this, where you actually buy into having your body frozen or your head frozen in the hopes that a medical discovery will come in 100 years, and then you'll be regenerated again. So whether it takes form in a scientific form, or the Buddha said even a religious form, that you feel, okay, I may not get immortality in this life, but I will get it in a next life. And so you conjecture, and that's where the verse comes tonight. If you notice the line, only those who go beyond conjecture, we're in the verse form now, free from grasping and rejecting. So this is what it's talking about. It's talking about a speculation, a surmise based on desire, based on fear and anxiety. It is similar to what Freud called wish-fulfilling, the wish-fulfilling impulse. In other words, to make things as you would like them to be rather than they are. Okay? And this kind of thirst then seeks to have and imagines, again, the Buddha would say, imagines this eternal, unchanging, either body or soul or whatever that goes on. Now, the Buddha in many of his dialogues said, okay, Help me understand, where is that? Show that to me. Is it something you know through experience? No, I don't know it through experience. It's very interesting. Many of us believe this. This becomes a view, a conviction. But when examined, we can't say exactly how we would substantiate that. It's a belief. It's a wish. It's a conjecture. Okay? So this is the second one. The third one, which is interesting, abhava, is that how you say it, abhava? Meaning not existence. It's the thirst for non-existence. Now this seems paradoxical, right? You have pleasure, you have immortality, and then you have a thirst basically for oblivion, for not to feel an experience, to be relieved of this mortal, this coil, and all suffering and pain and sensibility. And so the Buddha said in this life it leads to forms of addiction and suicide. You numb your consciousness through the opiates, through the drugs or whatnot, through TV, through consumerism, through whatever. You're numbing your sensibilities down so that you don't feel. And therefore you feel as if you've ended suffering. It's a false liberation from suffering because it's an oblivion. Or it manifests in a vision of the future, whereas all existence ceases at the point of mortality. And therefore there's nothing beyond, which then leads to, the Buddha said disturbingly, a denial, another wrong view of conviction, a denial of cause and effect. Since there's nothing that goes after death and nothing that survives, there's no karma and no responsibility, no accountability, so I can do whatever I want now. Do you see, these start to relate all these views. I'm just giving two framings tonight of how we might look at this, rather than going into the 62, but I want you to understand, if I did the 62, you'd think there's another list of terms. But if you do the psychological framing, you can actually see how these various views could come about, given this psychological ill-at-easeness that comes from this. So let's look at the verse. He says, unsurpassable great nirvana, perfect, bright, always serene and illuminating. Confused people call it death. Outside way believers imagine it as nothingness. Seekers of the two vehicles think it is doing nothing. All these arise from emotions and longings, the root of the 62 wrong views. They arbitrarily create empty names, but do they have any real meaning? I mean, this is just a wonderful verse. So, first of all, what's interesting, he calls nirvana always serene and illuminating. You see it's active. It's not dead. It's not passive. You've reached nirvana, everything's done. No, it's always serene and illuminating. It's responsive. It's alert. It's aware. Then he said, confused people call it death. And of course, I went over the first Western interpreters, when they encountered the term nirvana, rendered it as extinction, nothing with no whatsoever, the end of life. Even Carl Jung at first, because he had a limited translation, said it was a radical denial of life or existence, until he got better translations and realized it was closer to what he was aiming for, which is a, what would you call that? He called it true self, or the actualized self, which was more than just ego. But nonetheless, he finally saw a link. And he actually said at one point, he said, the thing that drew me to Buddhism was my role as a healer and a doctor, because I saw it addressed the deepest levels of human anxiety and angst and suffering and disease, not the superficial of just physical. So in that, I mean, I'm paraphrasing the quote, but he actually saw Buddhism in a therapeutic way rather than a religious way. Therapeutic to the human condition that's facing the sort of emptiness of existence that ends in mortality and so forth, and the quest to grab things you can never hold on to and so forth. Anyhow, that's Carl Jung in a nutshell. Sorry, Carl. Outside ways, believers imagine it as nothing. What this means, outside ways, there's two ways to render this. Outside means you're looking for the way. You're looking for spiritual truth outside your own person. You're looking for it externally, in magic, in superstition, in the odds, in sacrifices, and so on and so forth. You feel as if it will be given to you. It will be bestowed upon you if you go through the right motions. This also turns out to be, it's one of the wrong views, I think Stacy, isn't it? In one of the five, it's Shila Bhadra Paramasa. You know that one?
Something like
something like that. Shila Vasa Paramartha. Basically, it means you take the religions and rituals and devotions, including the moral precepts, and feel just by holding them or doing them in and themselves, you will then be saved or liberated. That the action, the agency will come from outside. That's what it means, outside, rather than inner transformation, inner understanding, inner illumination. Shila Basa Paramatha. Right?
Looking it up.
Okay, look it up. Keep looking. You look, you have an aura about you. I thought, oh, the light, but it's your phone that's shining in your face. So. Okay. Seekers of two vehicles, this is referring to a path of cultivation that seeks to, in a sense, bring an end to continued existence, to bring an end to birth and death. And they consider this as doing nothing. In other words, you reach Wu Wei, and it's a state of utter passivity. And he's saying that's a form of nihilism, actually. It's not really liberation. And so you could say, well, what does that refer? If you get into your meditation, and you're doing Buddhist, you think you're doing Buddhist meditation or yoga, whatever you're doing, and you're going zoning out, totally zoning out. It's just like you took a drug. You're just meditating for long hours and you don't feel anything. You're not aware of anything. You're not doing anything. You're disengaging, constantly disengaging, till you have no relationships, and you think this is liberation. This is the false doing nothing. It's an actual cutting off of awakened existence as opposed to entering into it where you're in the midst of it but not moved or turned by it. So the ultimate goal here is not to reach this passive, non-responsive state and call it nirvana, but rather to be right in the midst of things and not moved by them. That's why it says serene and illuminating as opposed to lights out. So you got to catch yourself because it's very easy, and there's texts that warn about this, it's very easy to use Buddhist meditation as a zone out, as a kind of opioid. Either to dumb down and numb your senses so you sit hour and hour after unmoving, and one text the teacher says, like that, that's the answer. What is that? Piece of wood to the disciple. You're like a dead piece of wood if you do that. At the same time, the other part of it is using your meditation to seek something. And so you're sitting constantly hoping for altered states of consciousness, hoping to see that, hear that, smell this, feel that, and then think, I got it. I'm getting awakened. Okay? So you got to be careful because those are falling into the two extremes of eternalism or nothingness. And it can happen in meditation. So what I'm pointing to is that Shilabhadra Paramasa.
Yes, it's correct.
Oh, thank you. Everybody hear that? I finally got one right. On the farm, we used to say even a blind pig will find an ear of corn eventually. So, in Shilabhasa Paramartha, you can use meditation as a ritual exercise that you're using to seek a response of something, an altered state of consciousness. And so, in a sense, you're misusing it. And it may look great. You might be able to sit on one of those rocks in the stream out in the cold for hours, and everybody, whoa, got a picture of you cultivating. But what's going on in the mind is this hunger for, just like the monk, when do I get my nirvana? I want to get it pretty soon, and I want to enjoy the bliss. You either fall into that, which eventually leads to a kind of craziness, because you start chasing states, and you become susceptible to influences. And if you go through this, and the text that really deals with this very succinctly and clearly is the Shrangama Sutra. So those of you who are doing meditation and want to make sure you got it right, not just what I teach is how to sit, how to breathe, and how to do your mind, but how to deal with states that come up in the process of meditation to keep your compass in focus, you should really study the Shrangama Sutra, because it's very clear how to do it properly. And it has to do with an attitude, not just an exercise. So a lot of people say, oh, I love Buddhist meditation. You know, you can do with all that religious baggage. Careful. That religious baggage, that you might call it, is meant to actually keep you pragmatically in a right form. Okay? Because you could say it this way. If you have the right baggage, you'll get there. If you have the wrong baggage, you won't. So if you think I can just take up Buddhist meditation, I'm coming from different religious traditions, you may or may not penetrate with it. Because some of those religious traditions may have, in fact, views about attaining something, or views about you're not worthy to attain anything, that when you do the meditation practice will screw you up. You got to be very careful here. And people say, oh, we'll just do Buddhist meditation. Anybody can do Buddhist meditation. Well, to a certain degree you can. You can come in here for 45 minutes, cross your legs and say, wow, well, I guess I beat the rush hour and I'm going to go back home, or whatnot. Or, boy, 45 minutes and nothing on my tongue. That beer and pizza is going to taste really good. You know, you can do it for that, okay? And you can do it even for, you're not de-stressing, but you're becoming less aware of your stress. Okay, however you do that. But if you're really going to get what this text is pointing to, then you better get the principles right. And I'm saying if you're seeking anything in doing the meditation, you won't get it right. And if you're afraid of anything, you won't get it right. Shurangama is very clear about this. Most people will deal with, oh, I don't want to seek anything, I'm just coming, you know. But they don't realize that they're unconsciously bringing fears to the meditation. And then that ends up tripping them up. For example, if you have arrogance, you won't get it. But if you have insecurity and what would we call a lowest self-esteem, and you feel, I'm not worthy, I can't do it, I don't have what it takes, you will actually go down a wrong road as well. So you can't think, only I can do it, I can really do it, I'm probably going to do it really quickly. No. Or I can't do it, I'm unworthy, someone needs to do it for me. Either one of those won't work with Buddhist meditation. So you have to be careful to examine your views or your convictions that you come with. And I'm not saying you have to buy into it, but I say do your study, look at these texts and say, if meditation is to be successful, I better get the parameters and the guidelines down, because these weren't just invented, they were tested over time and experienced by cultivators who put this into practice. So it's really worthwhile. I'm sorry to do this because I know in the 60s we got into this, we said, oh, we don't need texts and rules and whatnot, we're just going to sit. You know, and people like Doug and myself would go up into the Sierras and just sit under a tree. I'm going to get enlightened. Well, we didn't. And it might have behooved us to look at some of these texts, you know, and realize that these aren't here as belief doctrines, they're here as laboratory guides to meditation. And if you're going to do it right, you better get the theory down. Sorry to editorialize, but it's really important to understand that. Now, the last part, and I'll finish up here. Gee, I promised I'd do the whole verse, and I'm only getting to the verse line. Okay, so what? All these arise from emotions and longings. This is the Trishna. This is the thirst. Emotions and longings. It's another way of describing the unexamined, how do I say it? It's like a little twitch of craving that we all have. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's just this constant itch to want something I don't have, to want a little bit more, to fear that I don't get it, to kind of be always hungering, thirsting, longing, yearning. The whole American economy is built on this itch. If you think about it, this itch really is good for the economy, because we're always feeling, I got to get it, I don't have it, I need more, I need that next, blah, 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 blah. As long as that itch is there and somebody knows how to stimulate it, and they're getting really good at stimulating it, we help, because we actually tell them what we want. Like we salivate when we, or the neurotransmitters go up and they say, oh, so-and-so likes this, and we'll put it out and we buy it. This thing is saying emotions and longings. Now, it doesn't mean, last week, talking about just an expression of emotion, it means lingering in emotions, letting emotions take you over. When emotions become the driving factor, then we are in a state of being controlled by them rather than using them, because you need emotions to cultivate. Buddhas don't get to be Buddhas by suppressing emotions, but they don't get to by indulging them either. So you have to figure out how you use it. And longings, that's the thirst. That's another word for the thirst. Always feeling I don't have what it takes. I'm not complete. I lack something. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of vidya in the Buddhist psychology. And making that first mistake, we keep going further and further, looking to fill that imagined void. And the irony is, the further we go from it. So what meditation, in a sense, is trying to do is to create a ground to come back and empty that void. Face it and get that boogeyman out of the way. Because if you don't face it, you're being pushed by it. And it happens in the early hours of the morning or at night when you're going to sleep, all of a sudden that boogie anxiety will come and you feel it. And if you don't deal with it in a direct way through meditation practice and whatnot, it will just run your life, right? You all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. So, and then he's saying these arise, and the root is these wrong views, this fundamental misperception, and we arbitrarily then create names, but do they have any meaning? So this whole construction of what we're longing for, what we're seeking, what we're afraid for, we put labels on it called this and that, but is there really any substance to it at all? He's saying, are these mere names? Okay, that's a good sled for tonight. Any questions? Comments? If at some time you'd like to go over these 62, we could, and go through them, because it's kind of an interesting list, but I think for purposes of the class and tonight, it's more important to frame the ground from which they arise, because then we will understand the root of it rather than just the branch tip of the view. Because you can say, well, that's a wrong conviction, but you can't get rid of it unless you see where it's coming from. There's no, it's like a knot. You have to untie the root of the knot. You can't just sort of, I'm going to cut off that one. Because if you do that, by cutting off these convictions, you may actually create a kind of nihilism, a free fall in yourself. So it has to be a liberated letting go rather than just a renunciation of them. Because we've created them because they help us. Okay, so seriously, we have these attachments and kleshas not because they're stupid and wrong. I don't believe anything that's stupid or wrong. Now, the Buddha might say, yes, you do. But I'm saying from my point of view, I don't, because I'm creating a view or a conviction that is helping me get by in some way. So it's actually kind of enabling to have these. And we have them because they seem to help us momentarily frame things and get by.
They are misguided.
Huh?
But they may be misguided.
They're fundamentally misguided, but what's our alternative?
Right.
You see, that's how we feel it. Like, okay, if I don't go out and shop and buy, I'll feel more anxiety, and that's bad. So we go out and shop and buy, and temporarily the anxiety goes down. Or we just say, anxiety's gone. And then after the drug wears off, anxiety increases. And we say, well, anxiety. So it's misguided, but we don't know to do anything better. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha has this wonderful expression. He says, it's using suffering to try to end suffering. And isn't this foolish? So in a sense, these misguided convictions are not because we're stupid or because we weren't taught. It's because psychologically we've created these adapters to adjust to a reality that's very hard for us to break through and confront. And so they become kind of like crutches in a way. But we can't just immediately drop the crutches and walk. We have to go through a rebuilding of an alternative framework from which we can then stand strong. So just to go through the 62 and just take them off the list and say, I'm not going to think that, I'm not going to believe that, and blah, 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 pretty soon you find that everything that you build up that you think is holding you together isn't there. And if you do that prematurely, it's actually using Dharma in an unhealthy way because it creates, in an affect, more anxiety, more stress, more fear, more grasping. So this is something you cultivate gradually. But I'm saying the meditation practice really helps go to the root rather than just dealing with the superficial of it. And then I'll share this next week, my favorite passage from the Avatamsaka, which then goes on to describe what nirvana is. And it's like, this is such a treat. And I can't do it tonight because I finally found the text, but it gives this description of what a Buddha, small b, experiences. And it is the opposite of anything dour and drab and nihilistic. It's just like this wonderful expression of the fullness of the human capacity beyond what we could even imagine. And yet it's in very concrete and moving language. So next week, this is actually taken from part of the Avatamsaka Sutra called the Dashabhumi, which is the 10 grounds. And I think it's one of the chapters we still have Sanskrit for. The chapter Gandavyuha we have Sanskrit for, and we have it for this, and there may be one or two other,
I think it's just for those two.
there's two. So this is a wonderful series to go through these 10 grounds. It goes through the 10 stages of a bodhisattva's experience of awakening. And this one that I'm here is the last section, and it's describing when they finally open to the nature of reality and what the visceral experience of that is. It's a really wonderful passage. I had it intact tonight with the idea if I ended on too much of a bummer note, I could bring this in and cheer you up. But you all look very cheered up, so I don't have to do it tonight. Besides, even if I did, we're out of time, and that would not cheer you up if I stayed over. So I'll stop with that tonight and then pick this up next week and maybe finish the verse next week, but also share the Avatamsaka. By the way, if you just want a fun text to read and get lost in, do the Avatamsaka. I think most of it's translated now into English. There's two major translations. One is the BTTS translation, which is our Text Translation Society. And the other one, I think, is Cleary. He calls it the flower ornament scripture, and sometimes it's called the flower adornment scripture, or just the Avatamsaka Sutra. Okay, no questions, no comments. Announcements.
We actually have regular schedule tomorrow. I don't know if it is like public, but we have a member of our community passed away, and we'll have a service for tomorrow too. And we also have an Amitabha retreat starting Sunday at 8:30.
8:30 in the morning,
Sunday.
just a Sunday retreat.
It's a one-day Amitabha
Okay.
meditation, 8:30 to like maybe 4 or 5. Maybe Gosha will lead that.
Okay. This is there's a memorial service tomorrow afternoon for someone who passed away, part of the community. I don't know if you hear him say it. And she was a very strong supporter of the monastery. Young, relatively young. I think she was 40, 49, and very healthy and robust. And then suddenly got a cancer and just went very quickly. She was one of the founders and sustainers of Tiance, the tea place down on 4th Street. And she was always bringing really great teas from China back, and then we would have tea parties in the kitchen. And Hung Sure get out all his accoutrements and tea and whatnot, and then when he'd say, this one comes from, and the minerals in this rock's infused the tea, but the water from this creek got it, and, and then you drink it, and you could actually be transported to this place in China. And then she'd have visual pictures, she'd have monkeys jumping through trees and the teas coming. So very, very compassionate person. She helped many people through life, who, especially younger women who needed a mother aunt at certain times and whatnot. So we're going to miss her. Tomorrow is that memorial ceremony for her. So those of you who knew her, welcome to come and join in. Is that okay?
That's it.
And then we'll do the transference.
I mean, what else? I think any other things in the schedule? Okay, so I think our weekly schedule, we have tomorrow we have our regular Dharma assembly. Sunday we have a retreat. Monday we have Buddhism for a Modern Mind. I also think, Millie, you're having your yoga and qigong at 7:30. Yeah, 7:30.
Evening, 7:30 or morning?
7:30. I'll be here, and then the Buddhism for Modern Mind will be in the back with Doug. Tuesday, there's nothing up this Tuesday. Wednesday, Stephen Tainer's class. Thursday, we have the Insight Meditation Group. Friday, we have this lecture. So that's our weekly schedule.
So lots of opportunities to tune out and tune in. Okay, we'll do the transference. Every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May His boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise.
Bow in respect to the three heroes.